Is it true that you don't have to follow the law that Yah established in the Old Testament? Are we under the New Testament and its rules and regulations? Is there such thing as following the God of the Old Testament versus following the God of the New Testament, Jesus Christ? The only way to find out these answers are to really just kind of go to the scriptures ourselves and see. We will also use historical documentations throughout this presentation. It's probably going to be a 2-part series. Let's see if the apostles say these things. Let's see if the early followers of the Messiah understood and taught the way we teach today. Let's seek to answer this following question. Did the apostles understand and teach that we are no longer bound to keep the Heavenly Father's commandments because He established a new covenant through His Son Yahshua, the anointed? Let's find out.
Acts 21:17-25, according to the King James Version, around 59 AD, 29 years after Yeshua's death and resurrection. And when we were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. And the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things Elohim had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. And when they had heard it, they glorified Yah, and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law.
Now this is interesting. This is Paul, the apostle, speaking with James, that is to say Jacob, the brother of Yeshua. And Jacob says to Paul, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. Now wait a minute. I thought we no longer had to follow the law. How then do we see people of the New Testament being zealous of following it? Either we have misunderstood what the Apostle Paul said in his letters, or we have been lied to regarding what we are taught to understand and do in order to be believers or followers of the Most High and His Son. Peter did warn us about Paul's letters. You know what he said in 2 Peter 3:15-16. Let us read.
2 Peter 3:15-16. As our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given to him, has written to you, as also in all his epistles, speaking in them those things in which are some things hard to understand, which untaught and unstable people twist to their own destruction, as they do also the rest of the scriptures.
So, viewer, I'm more inclined to believe what Peter says here. I'm 100% certain that we have misunderstood Paul and the Christian church has gotten it wrong all these years. Simply put, there have been people who are untaught, untrained, and even unstable in the scriptures, who later joined the assembly, that is to say, the so-called Greek church fathers, and twisted the text. We have been deceived to believe through crafty men who snuck into the early assembly of the apostles and subtly took over, if not hijacked, the true gospel of our master and apostles. I know this is a big assertion, and I know you are still not convinced with what I've shown you so far. But what if I can show you with the church fathers' own writings and historical accounts? What if I can show you in the scriptures that this is exactly what happened? Let us first finish up this Acts passage. I started to read, and you'll start seeing the truth for yourself. I just read how these Jews were all zealous for following the law of the Almighty, and I posed a question to you. If we are no longer under the law, how then do we see James, the brother of Yahshua, tell Paul that the Hebrew believers who are also followers of the Messiah are all zealous in following the law? Now let's see what is said next.
And they are informed of thee, that thou teach all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, that is to say, the law, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs.
My question to you, viewer, would be, why would this be an issue if we aren't supposed to follow the law in the first place, according to many of our Christian scholars now? We must now investigate, what exactly was Paul being accused of? Did Paul actually say that the Hebrews ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs? Or has the Hebrews who were in the mixed assemblies with the Gentiles misunderstand or mistook Paul's letter as addressing them rather than the Gentiles at certain points in his letter? Because the only places I've seen Paul or any other apostle say that, someone didn't have to follow the law pertaining to circumcision is to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles only. But let's continue reading Acts, and you'll come to the same conclusion. Let's find out.
But they have been informed about you, that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, that is to say, the law, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore do what I tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself, Paul, also walk orderly and keep the law.
Again, I ask the question, if we are not supposed to keep the law, why then is the New Testament assembly in Jerusalem trying to convince everyone in the assembly that Paul indeed keeps the law? And the rumors about him saying to the Hebrews, not the Gentiles, but the Hebrews, that they shouldn't listen to Moses' command to circumcise your children. It's a flat out lie. Confusion arose because the Hebrews in mixed assemblies understood Paul's letters as saying they shouldn't keep the law of Moses regarding circumcision. However, the fact of the matter is this: Paul was only instructing what was said at the beginning by Peter himself, and that was the Gentiles didn't have to keep the law of circumcision contained within the law of Moses. How do I know this? How can I say this with such confidence? You might be asking this question. Well, it's because it says it in the next couple of verses. Let us read.
But concerning the Gentiles, who believe, that is to say, in the Messiah, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing. Well, observe no such what? The whole law of Moses? Or more specifically, the law of Moses pertaining to circumcision. Except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, which is in the law, from blood, which is also in the law, from things strangled, which is in the law, and from sexual immorality, which is also in the law.
So the only thing they told the Gentiles to do was the following: that they didn't have to circumcise. Everything else they had mentioned for the Gentiles to observe were those that were contained within the law. But the Hebrews were still bound by this law of circumcision. Gentiles weren't bound. Hebrews were. In fact, we know this is the case because Peter himself says the exact same thing in another place, way before this event with James even took place. I'm specifically talking about the event where Peter himself says Gentiles do not have to be circumcised. You don't believe me? Well, let's read it. Acts 15, 1 through 10. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, Unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem, to the apostles and elders about this question. So, being sent on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversation of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all the brethren. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all things that Elohim had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, It is necessary to circumcise them, and to command them to keep the law of Moses. Now the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Peter rose up and said to them, Men, brethren, you know that a good while ago Elohim chose among us that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. So Elohim, who knows the heart, acknowledged them by giving them the Ruach HaKodesh, just as he did to us, and make no distinction between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. Now therefore, why do you test Elohim by putting a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? Now, I know what you may be thinking. Hold on, brother. I thought there is only one law for all under this covenant. And I'm going to say you're absolutely correct. However, just because Gentiles don't have to follow a particular custom doesn't mean they aren't under the same governing body or laws. Let me give you an example, or rather two. Females in Israel had certain laws that only pertained to them, even though they are governed by the same constitution. Do you understand? Priests in Israel had laws that only they could perform and not your average Joe. Do you see? In much of the same way, Gentiles were not bound to circumcise themselves, because this was a custom given only to Hebrews through Abraham and Moses. Now, understand something. According to the law, if strangers who live amongst Israel wanted to partake in these sacrificial meals during the holy day festivities, or enter the temple, or was a servant within the household of an Israelite, they had to be circumcised. So, what is the difference now? Even though we still memorialize the holy days of Yah, we no longer sacrifice. So why would I circumcise the Gentile to participate in the holy day festival sacrificial meals, since sacrifices at the temple is no longer recognized by Yah? Why would I do that? The temple doesn't exist. Why must the Gentile be circumcised? Or rather, why must the Gentile be circumcised in order to enter the physical temple when its purpose is no longer necessary at this point? Why must the Gentile be circumcised if he isn't a servant bought with an Israelite's money? There is absolutely no mandate in the law to circumcise the Gentile unless it is for these reasons I've just mentioned. Whether the Gentile is to follow the custom of Moses' law pertaining to circumcision was the argument at those times. It was never whether the Gentile should keep the righteous dictates of the law or not.